Kale tightened the straps of his exoskeleton, feeling the familiar hum of the motors settle into his bones. The icy wind of the frozen planet whipped against his face, carrying a sharp tang of metal and frost. Every breath he took formed clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared, leaving a cold emptiness in the air. He glanced down at Lyra, lying on the slope below him, her face pale and her body trembling from the cold. "Kale, you should leave me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howl of the wind. Her thin jacket did little to protect her, and one leg was trapped under a slab of ice. "I'm slowing you down. Just go." Kale shook his head. His jaw tightened, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I told you, Lyra, we do this together, always." Her lips trembled, not from the cold, but from frustration and fear. "You don't understand, it's too dangerous." "You can survive, you don't need me." Kale crouched beside her, brushing some ice off her arm. "Listen to me. You've survived worse than this. You're not going anywhere without me." He reached for the exoskeleton's control panel, tapping a sequence into the console. The frame around him shifted and hummed, the servos adjusting to his weight and amplifying his strength. "I'm serious," Lyra said, her eyes glistening. "You can't carry me through that storm. You'll—" she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Kale took a deep breath and lifted her gently. "I can," he said simply. And then, as if testing the frame's power, he lifted her fully into his arms. The exoskeleton's servos whirred, and for a moment it felt like he was floating. Lyra's eyes widened. You actually can," she murmured. "I told you," Kale said with a faint smile. "I can." The storm had begun to gather strength, swirling ice and snow across the canyon floor. Visibility was almost zero. The sounds of the wind were deafening, and the cold gnawed at every exposed surface of skin. But Kale moved steadily, step by careful step, his exoskeleton adjusting to each shift of weight. The ground was uneven and treacherous, but he refused to rush. One wrong step could mean disaster. Lyra pressed herself closer to him, trying to conserve heat. She could feel the faint vibrations of the exoskeleton as it worked to carry her, every movement precise and controlled. Despite the danger, she couldn't help but marvel at the human ingenuity that made it possible. Without it, Kale could never have carried her through the snow and ice. And yet, here he was, refusing to let her go. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the storm. Kale focused only on each step, scanning the ground in front of him, feeling every shift of ice and snow. He could see shapes in the swirling white, jagged rocks, frozen crevices, and patches of brittle ice. Each obstacle required careful judgment. One wrong move could break the exoskeleton or send them both tumbling. "Kale," Lyra said, her voice weak. Why do you do this?" He glanced down at her, brushing snow from her hair. "Because it's what humans do," he said. "We don't give up on each other, we survive, we adapt. And sometimes we carry those who need help, that's who we are." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. She had heard the stories of human endurance before, but seeing it firsthand made it different. The storm could have swallowed them in an instant. Every step was a battle, every gust of wind a threat. And yet Kale moved with calm determination, guided by something stronger than fear, hope. The canyon stretched endlessly ahead, a frozen labyrinth of ice and rock. Kale had been here before, surveying the area with the team, but now, burdened with Lyra in his arms, every step felt heavier, every slope steeper. The exoskeleton carried the weight, but it required constant attention. He adjusted the power levels, shifted the hydraulics, and leaned on the frame's sensors to maintain balance. "You're amazing," Lyra whispered, a small smile breaking through the fear. I don't know how to thank you," Kale chuckled softly. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise me you'll hold on, that's all that matters right now." The storm intensified. Snow stung their faces and the wind roared like an angry ocean. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, but Kale did not falter. His eyes flicked between the ground and the distant horizon, calculating each move, anticipating every slip. The exoskeleton's motors strained slightly under the combined weight of the cold, the wind, and Lyra herself, but it held. Hours blurred together as they moved through the frozen wilderness. Lyra's body ached, and her fingers were numb, but she refused to let herself cry. She had always been strong, but she had never imagined what human determination could achieve. With Kale carrying her, she felt a mixture of awe and shame. She had begged him to leave, and yet he had refused. At one point, Kale paused, setting her down on a relatively flat patch of ice. He crouched beside her, adjusting her jacket and checking her leg. "We need to rest for a moment," he said. "Just a few minutes, then we keep moving." Lyra shook her head. "I'm fine, you don't need to stop for me." "Yes, I do," Kale said firmly. "If I push myself too far, I could make a mistake. We can't risk that." Humans survive by knowing our limits, and sometimes by respecting them. She nodded reluctantly, letting him tend to her injuries. The exoskeleton powered down slightly, allowing him to move more freely as he adjusted her leg. It had been trapped under ice, and the cold had made the muscles stiff and painful. Kale worked quickly but carefully, loosening the ice and checking for any signs of serious injury. "You know," Lyra said after a long moment, "I never realized humans really can do anything if we put our minds to it." Kale smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not magic," he said. "It's persistence, creativity, and caring. That's what makes us human. We solve problems, we adapt, and we refuse to give up on each other." She looked at him, a mix of gratitude and wonder in her eyes. I was wrong. I shouldn't have begged you to leave." "You weren't wrong to be scared," Kale said softly. "It's natural. But fear doesn't decide the outcome. Humans do, and right now we're moving forward together." The storm began to ease slightly, the wind dropping from a roar to a steady whistle. Visibility improved, and Kale could see the next ridge ahead. It was still treacherous, a mix of ice and jagged rocks, but it was manageable. He lifted Lyra once more, feeling the exoskeleton hum and shift under the strain. Every step required concentration, every movement precise, but Kale did not hesitate. As they moved, Lyra began to notice the small things. How Kale adjusted the hydraulics to compensate for each step, how he anticipated the icy patches before they became dangerous, how he used his body and the exoskeleton together in perfect harmony. It was a dance of human ingenuity and determination, and she felt herself inspired by it. Hours passed. The sun, or what little of it penetrated the storm clouds, began to set, casting long shadows across the frozen canyon. Kale's face was streaked with frost and sweat, but his eyes remained steady, focused on the path ahead. Lyra rested her head against his chest, exhausted but alive, trusting him completely. Finally, they reached a plateau, a relatively safe area where the wind had less force and the ice was more stable. Kale set Lyra down carefully, kneeling beside her to check her condition. "We made it this far," he said, voice full of quiet triumph. "Just a little further and we'll be near the colony." Lyra looked at him, tears forming in her eyes. I don't know how to describe what you've done," she whispered. "It's more than human, it's amazing." Kale shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "It's just what we do," he said. "Humans survive, humans endure, and humans carry each other through the impossible, that's all." They settled on the plateau, taking a brief rest before the final stretch. Lyra leaned against him, exhausted but comforted. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. Yet she felt a new understanding of human strength, an appreciation not for machines or technology, but for the spirit and determination that drove them. Kale looked out over the icy expanse, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the thrill of survival. The canyon stretched endlessly ahead, full of dangers and obstacles, but he felt ready. With the exoskeleton to augment his strength, and with his determination to never leave a friend behind, Kale knew that they would survive. And he knew that, no matter what came next, humanity's ingenuity and endurance would carry them forward. Lyra whispered, "Thank you, Kale," and he simply nodded. No words were needed. The storm, the ice, the cold, they had all been met with human willpower, and for now that was enough. Together they prepared to move forward again, one careful, steady step at a time. The night was darker than Kale expected. The storm had passed, but the sky was thick with clouds, hiding the weak light of the distant sun. The frozen plateau they had reached offered a brief respite, but the cold still seeped into every layer of clothing. Lyra shivered, curling herself tighter in the arms of the exoskeleton frame as Kale adjusted the power levels to keep the motors warm. "Are you sure this exoskeleton can last another day?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. She felt guilty for relying on him so completely, for being a burden he had willingly chosen to carry. Kale shook his head, checking the battery levels and servo pressures. "It's holding steady," he said. "I've been monitoring it. As long as I pace myself, it should last, but we have to move carefully. Every step counts now." Lyra leaned back, letting him support her weight. "I still can't believe you've carried me this far," she admitted. "I've begged you to leave me and you just refused." Kale smiled faintly, adjusting a joint on the exoskeleton. "That's because humans don't give up on each other. Not when we can help. Not when there's hope. You would do the same for me if the roles were reversed." She looked at him, eyes wide in the dim light. She realized, even more now than before, that Kale's determination was something beyond physical strength. It was his mind, his careful planning, his constant attention to every detail that made this possible. Humans could endure more than machines, more than tools, if they used their intelligence and willpower. They continued moving along the plateau, the terrain uneven and covered in patches of brittle ice. Kale led the way, using the exoskeleton to stabilize each step and testing the ice before placing his full weight. Lyra rested her head against his chest, letting herself trust him completely. The silence between them was filled only by the hum of the exoskeleton and the distant creaks of ice shifting in the cold. Every sound seemed amplified in the frozen stillness, a reminder that they were alone in a vast, dangerous wilderness. Hours passed. The sky slowly lightened as the distant sun rose, casting faint shades of orange across the ice. The wind had lessened, but the cold was still biting. Lyra's fingers were numb, and her leg ached from being trapped under ice for so long. Kale noticed and without a word adjusted her position to relieve the pressure. "You've done more than anyone else would," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Even the colony wouldn't have managed this, not without giving up." Kale glanced down at her, eyes softening. "Humans surprise themselves all the time. We find strength in situations we never imagined. And we don't just survive, we adapt. That's why I'm not worried." They reached the edge of a narrow canyon where the frozen ice had cracked into deep fissures. The path was dangerous, and Kale had to plan every movement carefully. He bent down, examining the fissures, noting the safest spots to step. The exoskeleton allowed him to make precise adjustments, distributing weight to avoid breaking the thin ice bridges. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded, gripping his shoulder lightly. "I'm ready. I trust you." Step by careful step, Kale carried her across the canyon. The exoskeleton hummed under the strain, its joints flexing with every movement. He paused occasionally to test the ice, ensuring it could hold their combined weight. Lyra felt her heart race with each step, but she also felt awe at Kale's calm determination. It was not fearlessness. It was focus, intelligence, and trust in human ingenuity. By mid-morning, they reached the far side of the canyon. Kale set Lyra down for a moment, letting her stretch her frozen limbs. She looked at him, grateful and amazed. "I don't know how you keep going," she said. "You must be exhausted." Kale shook his head. "Exhaustion isn't the problem. The problem is losing focus. If I slip, we both slip. The exoskeleton helps, but it doesn't replace careful thinking. That's all it takes." She smiled faintly, realizing the truth in his words. Technology could assist, but human thought, ingenuity, and determination were what truly mattered. Kale's mind was constantly calculating, adjusting, planning. Every step, every decision had been made with precision and care. As they continued their journey, the landscape changed. The ice gave way to rocky terrain, interspersed with patches of snow. The sun rose higher, warming the ground just enough to make some of the frozen surfaces slippery. Kale moved slowly, testing each rock before stepping. Lyra felt every small jolt as the exoskeleton shifted to compensate for uneven ground. "I can feel the colony ahead," Kale said after a while, peering over the rocky ridges. "Not far now, but there's still one long stretch before we reach safety. It's steep and uneven. I'll need your help to keep balance." Lyra nodded, though she wasn't sure how she could help. Kale's words reminded her that survival was not just about strength, it was about cooperation, trust, and human problem-solving. She leaned slightly to adjust her weight, and Kale acknowledged the small contribution with a nod. They moved together, step by careful step. The slope was steep, and every movement required attention. The exoskeleton whirred with effort, but Kale maintained control, ensuring Lyra remained safe in his arms. She marveled at the way he adapted to the terrain, adjusting the joints of the frame to absorb shocks and maintain balance. Hours blurred together again and fatigue began to set in. Lyra's head drooped against Kale's chest and her breathing became shallow. Kale noticed immediately. He paused, lowering her to a safer patch of ground. "We need a short break," he said gently. "Even a few minutes will help us last the day." She shook her head weakly. "I don't want to slow you down." "You're not slowing me down," Kale said firmly. "Humans work best when we support each other. That's how we endure. That's how we survive." Reluctantly, Lyra allowed him to adjust her position and check her leg. The skin was pale, but there was no permanent damage. Kale hummed softly, running a few small diagnostic checks on the exoskeleton to ensure it would continue functioning. It was a careful balance of engineering and human effort, a combination that kept them moving forward. After a few minutes, Kale lifted her once more. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded, gripping his shoulders lightly. She felt the exoskeleton's strength beneath her, marveling at how it made him capable of feats she had never imagined. But it was more than the machine. It was his mind, his focus, and his refusal to give up that made the journey possible. They continued upward, moving through the rocky slopes past icy patches and small crevices. The sun climbed higher, and the wind had lessened almost entirely. Yet the cold was still biting, and each step required concentration. Kale's body was tiring, but his mind remained sharp. He adjusted the exoskeleton's power levels to maintain efficiency, using minimal energy while maximizing stability. "You're amazing," Lyra whispered again. "I've never seen anyone move like this. It's incredible." Kale chuckled softly. "It's just practice and paying attention. Humans can do amazing things when we focus. That's what makes us survive where machines alone cannot." They reached a particularly steep patch of rock. Kale tested each foothold carefully, and then adjusted the exoskeleton's joints to distribute the weight evenly. He explained to Lyra in a calm voice how to shift her balance slightly to help him maintain stability. She followed his instructions, feeling a sense of pride and contribution despite her weakness. Hours passed, and the rocky terrain finally gave way to a more stable surface. The distant colony appeared on the horizon, a small cluster of structures glowing faintly in the morning light. Lyra's eyes filled with hope. She realized that survival was not only about strength, but about trust, intelligence, and human determination. Kale noticed her change in mood and smiled faintly. "See, we're almost there, just a little further." Exhausted but encouraged, Lyra relaxed slightly, letting Kale carry her as they approached the colony. Every step was still difficult, but the end was near. She realized that the journey had taught her something important. Humans could endure more than she had ever imagined, not through brute strength, but through ingenuity, cooperation, and willpower. As they neared the colony, a small group of colonists noticed them. Some ran toward them, shouting words of encouragement, while others prepared equipment to assist in their arrival. Kale adjusted his pace, slowing slightly to allow the exoskeleton to stabilize and ensure Lyra remained safe. She smiled faintly, looking up at him. I never realized humans could do this, she said. Even when it seems impossible, we find a way. Kale nodded, his eyes focused on the path ahead. That's what makes us human, he said. We survive, we endure, we carry each other when we must. And we adapt to whatever challenges come our way. The colony gates drew closer, and Kale's confidence grew. The journey had been exhausting, but it had also proven the incredible capacity of human determination. With every step, he demonstrated that the combination of ingenuity, technology, and compassion could overcome almost any obstacle. Finally, they reached the gates. Colonists rushed forward to assist, but Kale carefully lowered Lyra to the ground, allowing the exoskeleton to power down gradually. She stood, unsteady but alive, and looked at him with gratitude and admiration. You really carried me all this way, she said, voice filled with awe. I don't know how to thank you. Kale smiled, brushing the snow from his shoulders. You don't need to thank me, just remember this: humans endure, humans survive, and humans take care of each other. That's what matters most. Together they walked into the colony, exhausted but alive. The frozen canyon behind them seemed smaller now, conquered not by brute strength, but by human intelligence, willpower, and determination. And Lyra understood something important. Survival was never just about machines or tools. It was about the humans who used them and the heart and mind behind every action. The sun shone faintly through the clouds, a promise of warmth and safety ahead. Kale and Lyra had survived the storm and the frozen wilderness. And as they moved toward the colony, both of them knew that the journey had only strengthened their understanding of what it truly meant to be human. The colony's gates were simple metal arches, frost-covered and worn, but to Kale and Lyra, they looked like a shining promise. The moment they stepped through, the chill of the canyon seemed to fade slightly. Inside the walls, small structures clustered together, connected by narrow paths cleared of snow, and faint lights flickered from windows, casting warm glows onto the icy ground. Colonists were busy with morning routines, but when they saw Kale and Lyra, many paused and stared. Some ran forward to help. One held a blanket, another carried hot water in a metal flask. Lyra's knees wobbled, and she clutched Kale's arm for support, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The last few days had been a trial unlike any she had faced, and now that the end was near, it all seemed almost unreal. You made it, one of the colonists said, her voice full of awe. I can't believe you carried her all the way from the canyon. Kale shook his head modestly, brushing frost from his exoskeleton. It's not just me, he said. It's the exoskeleton, careful planning, and a lot of patience. Humans can do incredible things when we work together and think creatively. Lyra smiled faintly, wrapping herself in the warm blanket. She could still feel the ache of her leg, the stiffness from lying trapped in ice, but the relief was overwhelming. He didn't give up, she said softly, almost to herself. Even when I begged him. Inside the main hall, the colonists gathered to check her condition. Kale set her down gently on a padded bench, keeping one hand on her shoulder. The medtechs examined her leg carefully, confirming that the frostbite and bruising were minimal and that she would fully recover. Lyra exhaled in relief, grateful beyond words. You've done something remarkable, the chief medic said. Not many could carry someone through that kind of terrain. Kale shrugged lightly. It wasn't remarkable, it was necessary. Humans survive because we adapt, not because we're invincible. Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. She wanted to argue that it was incredible, that she had never seen anyone endure so much, but she could not find the words. She had begged him to leave her, and he had refused. He had carried her through snowstorms, ice cracks, and frozen slopes, showing her the limits of human endurance. After a short rest, Kale walked Lyra to one of the living quarters. The room was small but warm, the heater casting gentle heat across the metal walls. She sat on the bed, rubbing her arms to bring warmth back into her fingers. Kale stood near the doorway, his exoskeleton powered down but still attached. He watched her carefully, as if ready to spring into action if needed. "You should rest," he said. "You've been through a lot and your body needs recovery." Lyra nodded, her gaze softening. "I will soon, but first I need to understand how you did it. How you kept going for 3 days, carrying me through storms and ice." Kale smiled faintly, sitting down across from her. "It wasn't magic," he said. "The exoskeleton helped, yes, but machines alone don't survive. It's careful planning, attention to detail, and trust. Every step, every movement was calculated. I had to think, adapt, and anticipate the dangers before they happened. That's what humans do." She listened, fascinated. "So it's your mind more than the exoskeleton?" Kale nodded. "Exactly. Machines amplify our abilities, but it's our intelligence and determination that make the difference. The exoskeleton can lift heavy weights, but it can't think for me. It can't anticipate ice cracking under our feet or plan how to cross a crevice safely. Humans do that. Humans survive when machines alone would fail." Lyra leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She felt a mixture of awe and humility. She had begged him to leave her, thinking she was a burden, but he had carried her anyway. He had trusted his mind, his skills, and his endurance to keep them both alive. She realized how small she had underestimated human determination. The following hours were quiet but filled with reflection. Lyra allowed herself to rest while Kale monitored her progress, checking for signs of frostbite or lingering fatigue. Outside, the colony bustled with activity, but inside the warm room there was a calm sense of safety. For the first time in days, Lyra felt at peace. As evening approached, Kale stepped outside the room for a moment, looking out over the snowy landscape. The canyon stretched behind them, a jagged reminder of the peril they had survived. The sun was low, casting golden light across the ice. He took a deep breath, feeling both relief and a quiet pride. Humans could endure, adapt, and survive even when the odds seemed impossible. And today he had proven it. When he returned, Lyra was sitting up, her blanket around her shoulders. "Kale," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just carry me, you carried hope. You carried humanity." Kale shook his head. "No need to thank me," he said. "We all carry each other in different ways. Today it was my turn. Tomorrow it might be someone else's. That's what keeps us alive." She smiled faintly, feeling both gratitude and admiration. The experience had changed her perspective. She had seen human strength in a new light, not brute force, but intelligence, creativity, and endurance combined. Humans could adapt to impossible situations if they trusted their minds, their hearts, and each other. The night settled in, quiet and still. The storm had left only memories and traces of ice, but the lesson remained. Survival was about more than strength. It was about cooperation, trust, and the ability to think beyond immediate danger. Kale had demonstrated that perfectly. The next day, Lyra felt strong enough to walk short distances with support. Kale stayed close, helping her balance and offering advice for careful steps over icy patches. She noticed how he continuously scanned the terrain, adjusting movements based on subtle changes in snow and ice. His mind worked constantly, processing risk and opportunity simultaneously. "You really think of everything," she said, smiling. "Even the smallest detail." Kale shrugged. "Small details make big differences. One wrong step can undo everything. Humans survive by noticing the details, by thinking ahead, and by refusing to give up. That's what I've been doing for 3 days straight." She laughed softly. "I suppose I underestimated human endurance." "You did," Kale said lightly, though there was no malice. "But you also learned something important. Survival isn't just about strength or technology. It's about the mind, determination, and caring for each other. That's what makes humans capable of more than we think." As they moved through the colony, more colonists noticed them. Some paused to comment, some offered assistance, and many simply watched in awe. Kale's journey had become a small legend already, an example of human ingenuity and endurance. Lyra felt proud to be part of it, though she knew the true hero was Kale himself. By evening, Kale and Lyra returned to their room, exhausted but satisfied. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm shadows across the snow-covered colony. Lyra sat by the window, reflecting on the last 3 days. She had been terrified, in pain, and ready to give up, but Kale's presence and determination had carried them both to safety. She turned to him as he checked the exoskeleton one last time for the day. "Kale," she said softly, "do you ever wonder how far humans can go? After all of this, I feel like there's nothing we can't overcome." Kale looked at her, a small smile on his lips. "Humans will always surprise themselves. Every challenge we face teaches us something new. Today, we survived because we trusted our minds and each other. Tomorrow, who knows? But whatever comes, we'll find a way." The room grew quiet as night settled over the colony. Outside, the frozen landscape stretched endlessly, a reminder of the dangers they had faced and survived. Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in days. She knew that Kale's determination, human ingenuity, and the trust they shared had made the impossible possible. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized something important. Survival wasn't just about enduring the storm or the ice. It was about using intelligence, courage, and care to navigate the impossible. Kale had carried her through 3 days of harsh wilderness, but more than that, he had carried a lesson about humanity itself, how humans could overcome, adapt, and support each other in ways no machine alone could achieve. When she awoke the next morning, the colony was quiet, bathed in soft sunlight. Kale had already left to check the outer perimeter, ensuring that the pathways were safe for continued travel. Lyra rose slowly, feeling stronger and more capable than the day before. The journey wasn't over, but the lessons had been clear. Humans were capable of enduring incredible hardship, and together they could survive anything. She took a deep breath of the crisp air and smiled. Kale would return soon, and together they would continue their journey, moving forward with determination, intelligence, and trust. The frozen wilderness behind them was a conquered challenge, a testament to human strength in both body and mind. Lyra felt a new sense of confidence and hope. Humans could adapt, humans could endure, and humans could carry each other through impossible situations. Today had proven it. Tomorrow they would continue to prove it, one careful, determined step at a time. The morning light spilled gently over the colony, illuminating the frost-covered rooftops and the narrow pathways winding between the buildings. Kale stood outside the small quarters where Lyra had rested, checking the exoskeleton's joints and power levels. The frame hummed softly as the sun warmed the metal, and he could feel its energy stabilizing. He had learned the hard way that even a slight malfunction could turn a careful journey into a disaster, and he double-checked every connection before continuing. Lyra stepped outside, her movements still cautious but steadier than the day before. She had been resting, stretching her leg carefully, and the warmth of the colony had begun to restore her strength. Seeing Kale checking the exoskeleton with such focus, she felt a new respect for his patience and careful planning. Survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about preparation, observation, and attention to detail. "Are you ready to move?" Kale asked, his voice calm but filled with quiet determination. Lyra nodded. "Yes, I'm stronger now and I trust you. Let's continue." Together, They moved along the cleared paths of the colony, past buildings where colonists were beginning their daily tasks. Some stopped to wave or offer encouragement, and Lyra smiled at their recognition. She realized that Kale's actions over the last 3 days had become more than just a personal effort. They had inspired others. The colony saw what humans could achieve through ingenuity, endurance, and care for each other. They reached the edge of the colony and paused, looking at the terrain ahead. The frozen wilderness still stretched in all directions, but beyond the immediate plateau, the landscape sloped gently downward, then rose again into jagged hills. Kale scanned the route carefully, planning the safest path while considering the exoskeleton's limitations and Lyra's fragile leg. "We need to cross this slope carefully," he said. "There are patches of thin ice and hidden rocks. One wrong step could hurt us." Lyra nodded, gripping his arm lightly. She felt nervous but also inspired. She had seen him carry her across icy canyons and through storms. This slope, with all its hidden dangers, seemed easier by comparison. Kale's calm determination was contagious, and she allowed herself to trust his judgment completely. Step by step, they descended. Kale tested each patch of ice with a foot before placing his full weight. The exoskeleton whirred and shifted, keeping both of them balanced. Lyra followed his instructions precisely, leaning slightly or adjusting her weight to aid him in maintaining stability. She realized how much thought went into every movement. He wasn't just carrying her. He was actively thinking through every possible danger and adjusting in real time. After several hours of careful descent, they reached the base of the slope. The terrain here was more forgiving, but new challenges appeared. The hills ahead were uneven, with sharp rocks jutting through snow and ice. Kale paused for a moment, scanning the landscape. The exoskeleton sensors highlighted the safest route, but the choices still required human judgment. Machines could show possibilities, but only a human could weigh risk and make the right decision. "We'll need to move slowly through the hills," Kale explained. "There are unstable patches of ice and hidden crevices. One misstep and we could get stuck, or worse." Lyra nodded again, feeling a sense of awe. Every step forward had been a lesson in human endurance and ingenuity. She had watched Kale think, adapt, and improvise through nearly impossible conditions. His ability to combine careful planning with quick thinking made her realize that survival wasn't about brute force. It was about intelligence, creativity, and perseverance. They began their journey through the hills. Kale adjusted the exoskeleton's power to handle uneven surfaces, and Lyra leaned into his instructions, helping him balance by shifting her weight at the right moments. The landscape stretched endlessly, but Kale remained focused, moving steadily toward their destination. By late afternoon, they reached a particularly tricky section. A frozen stream cut across the path, its surface thin and brittle. Kale knelt beside it, testing the ice carefully before placing his foot. "We'll need to cross slowly," he said. "I'll step first, then you follow, trust me." Lyra held her breath but nodded. Kale moved carefully, the exoskeleton adjusting with every shift of weight. He reached the middle of the stream, tested the ice again, then gestured for her to follow. She stepped onto the ice, trusting his judgment and her own careful movements. The ice creaked under their weight but held. Together, they crossed the stream safely. Once on the other side, Lyra let out a sigh of relief. "That was scary," she admitted, a small smile forming. "But I trust you completely. I've learned that humans can handle almost anything with patience and intelligence." Kale smiled faintly. "Exactly. Survival is never about rushing. It's about thinking, adapting, and supporting each other. That's what makes humans remarkable." As they continued through the hills, the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the snow, and the air grew colder. Lyra's leg ached and fatigue began to creep in. Kale noticed immediately and suggested a short rest. They found a small outcropping of rock, sheltered from the wind, and Kale set her down gently. "Just a few minutes," he said. It will help us regain strength before the final stretch. Lyra leaned against the rock, grateful for the support. She watched Kale as he adjusted the exoskeleton, making small repairs and recalibrations. Every movement was precise, each adjustment deliberate. She realized that human endurance wasn't just physical, it was mental. Kale's focus and intelligence had been just as important as his strength in carrying her through the frozen wilderness. After a brief rest, they rose and continued. The final stretch of hills lay ahead, and beyond them, the distant plateau where a small signal tower marked the safe zone. Kale's confidence never wavered. He scanned the terrain carefully, identifying the safest paths, and calculated every step to minimize risk. Lyra followed his lead, moving with careful attention to his guidance. The sun set, casting long shadows across the hills. The light dimmed, but Kale remained alert, adjusting the exoskeleton to help with visibility and balance. Lyra realized how much trust she had placed in him. Every step required reliance on both his judgment and her own careful attention. The journey had become a lesson in human capability, how intelligence, creativity, endurance, and care combined to achieve what seemed impossible. By nightfall, they reached the final ridge. The signal tower glowed faintly in the distance, a small beacon of safety. Kale paused, scanning the ridge carefully. The slope was uneven, with hidden rocks and patches of ice. One wrong step here could cause a fall, but Kale's careful assessment gave him confidence. "We're close," he said softly. "Just a little further and we'll reach the safe zone. Stay close and follow my instructions." Lyra nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. She had been carried through storms, icy canyons, and frozen slopes. She had witnessed human ingenuity and endurance at every turn. Now, the end of their journey was in sight, and the lessons were clear. Survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about intelligence, careful planning, trust, and the willingness to carry each other through impossible situations. Step by careful step, Kale carried her along the ridge. The exoskeleton hummed softly, adjusting to each movement and maintaining balance on the uneven surface. Lyra followed his instructions precisely, helping him shift weight at critical moments. The ridge was narrow, but Kale's careful planning and focus made the journey possible. Finally, they reached the base of the signal tower. A small team of colonists was waiting, lights casting a warm glow on the snow. Kale lowered Lyra gently to the ground. She stood, unsteady but triumphant, feeling the ache of exhaustion in every muscle. She looked at Kale with gratitude and awe. "You did it," she whispered. "We made it." Kale smiled faintly, brushing frost from his shoulders. "We did it together," he said. "Humans endure by supporting each other, by thinking and adapting. That's how we survive." The colonists rushed forward, offering blankets, hot drinks, and congratulations. Lyra felt a mixture of pride and relief. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had witnessed the full extent of human capability. Humans could endure impossible challenges, adapt to any situation, and carry each other through hardship. As they settled near the signal tower, Lyra looked at Kale. "I understand now," she said softly. "Survival isn't just strength or tools. It's intelligence, trust, endurance, and care. That's what makes humans extraordinary." Kale nodded. "Exactly. Today we've proven it. Tomorrow there will be new challenges, but humans will meet them just like we met this one. We'll adapt, we'll endure, and we'll carry each other through anything." The night was quiet, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. The frozen wilderness behind them seemed less threatening now, a conquered challenge that had tested both body and mind. Lyra felt stronger, wiser, and inspired by the journey. She realized that humans were capable of more than she had ever imagined, and that with intelligence, determination, and trust, anything was possible. Together, they prepared for the night, resting near the signal tower. Lyra wrapped herself in blankets, feeling warmth return to her fingers and toes. Kale monitored the exoskeleton one last time, ensuring it was ready for the journey ahead. Outside, the stars sparkled in the clear night sky, a reminder that the universe was vast and full of challenges. Lyra felt a new sense of hope. Humans could endure storms, ice, and exhaustion. Humans could carry each other through impossible situations. And humans could survive not just through strength but through intelligence, determination, and care. Today had proven it. Tomorrow they would continue to prove it one step at a time together. The night passed quietly. The cold was less harsh, the snow less threatening. Lyra slept peacefully, knowing that Kale's determination and human ingenuity had kept them safe. She dreamed of the journey ahead, confident that whatever challenges they faced, humans would find a way to overcome them. When dawn broke, the signal tower glowed softly, and the colony came alive with movement. Kale and Lyra rose, ready to continue. The frozen wilderness beyond still held dangers, but they were prepared. They had survived storms, ice, and exhaustion. They had carried each other through impossible terrain. And they knew, with certainty, that humans could endure anything when mind, heart, and determination were combined. The sun had barely risen when Kale and Lyra left the safety of the signal tower area. The colony behind them buzzed with morning activity, but the frozen wilderness still stretched ahead. The hills and icy ridges they had traversed were behind them now, and the path to the distant plateau, their final challenge, lay open. Kale's exoskeleton hummed quietly, ready for the last leg of their journey, and he carried Lyra carefully, balancing her weight with steady precision. "Are you ready?" Kale asked softly, scanning the terrain ahead. The plateau wasn't far, but it was uneven and dotted with hidden ice patches. A misstep here could undo all the progress they had made. Lyra nodded, her face set with determination. "I'm ready. Let's finish this." Step by step, they moved forward. The sun climbed higher, warming the snow slightly, but the cold was still sharp. The wind blew intermittently, carrying small flurries of snow across the plateau. Kale's eyes flicked constantly to the ground, measuring distance, checking ice thickness, and anticipating hidden hazards. The exoskeleton adjusted automatically to every movement, but Kale's focus remained the most important factor. He had learned over the last 4 days that even the most advanced technology could not replace human judgment. As they advanced, Lyra felt a mixture of awe and exhaustion. She had already been carried through storms, icy slopes, and treacherous canyons, but this final stretch felt both familiar and different. She could sense the end approaching, but the terrain still demanded every ounce of concentration. Kale moved with careful precision, adjusting the exoskeleton's motors to distribute weight evenly and maintain balance over every small ridge and crevice. "You've done more than anyone could ask," Lyra said quietly, her voice tinged with admiration. "You've carried me farther than I ever imagined anyone could, and you've never faltered once." Kale smiled faintly. "I haven't faltered because giving up isn't an option. Humans endure by refusing to give up, by thinking, adapting, and supporting each other. That's how we survive." The plateau ahead was uneven, with patches of ice hidden beneath thin snow. Kale lowered Lyra slightly in his arms, scanning each step carefully. "We'll move slowly," he said. "I'll test the ice before stepping fully. You follow my lead exactly and we'll be fine." Lyra nodded, gripping his shoulders lightly. Every step was tense, every creak of the ice beneath them amplified in the still morning air, but Kale's calm and measured pace reassured her. She had witnessed human ingenuity at every turn, how Kale adapted to storms, cracks, and cliffs, but she had never realized how much thought and observation went into every single movement. They reached a section where the ice was thin, stretching over a small frozen stream. Kale paused, testing the surface with one boot, then the other. The exoskeleton flexed slightly as he adjusted his weight, and Lyra shifted hers in response. Slowly, step by step, they crossed the stream. The ice groaned but held, and Lyra felt a surge of relief and pride. "That was easier than I expected," she said, a small smile breaking through her fatigue. "But only because you were so careful." Kale nodded. "Careful planning and observation make all the difference. Humans survive not by rushing but by thinking and adapting. That's what makes us capable of the impossible." As they continued, the plateau began to rise. The final slope was steeper than anything they had crossed before, and small boulders dotted the path. Kale's careful scanning became even more critical. He adjusted the exoskeleton's hydraulics to handle the uneven weight distribution and tested every step for stability. Lyra leaned into his guidance, helping him maintain balance by shifting her weight subtly when he indicated. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, warming the plateau slightly, but the cold was relentless. Lyra's leg throbbed, and fatigue weighed heavily on both of them, but neither faltered. Kale's steady voice guided every movement, and his patience and planning allowed them to continue safely. Finally, they reached the base of the last ridge. The plateau stretched beyond, and the small settlement at the edge was just visible, a collection of buildings and landing pads gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Kale paused, scanning the final stretch. The slope was uneven and dotted with hidden ice patches, but it was manageable. "We're almost there," he said softly. "Just this ridge, then the plateau. One careful stretch and we'll be safe." Lyra felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and exhilaration. She had been carried through 4 days of frozen wilderness, storms, and hidden dangers. She had begged him to leave, thinking she was a burden, and he had refused every time. Now the end was within sight. Step by step, Kale moved forward, carrying her carefully. The exoskeleton hummed softly, adjusting to each subtle shift of weight. Lyra followed his instructions, leaning as needed to maintain balance. The sun highlighted the icy ridges, casting long shadows across the plateau, and every creak of ice reminded them of the dangers they had survived. As they neared the top of the ridge, Kale noticed a particularly tricky patch, a thin sheet of ice over a small crevice. He paused, adjusting the exoskeleton's balance. "This is the last tricky spot," he said. "Stay close and follow my movements exactly." Lyra nodded, her heart racing. Kale moved slowly, testing each section of ice with a careful footstep. The exoskeleton shifted to compensate for every subtle imbalance. Lyra leaned slightly when he indicated, trusting his judgment completely. With one final careful stride, they crossed the patch safely. Lyra let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with relief and awe. Kale smiled faintly. "Yes, together we did it. Humans endure because we think, adapt, and care for each other. That's how we survive, and that's how we carry each other through the impossible." The settlement ahead was closer now, and colonists began to notice them from a distance. Some ran forward with blankets and hot drinks, others simply cheered. Lyra's exhaustion faded slightly as she realized the journey was complete. She had been carried across frozen slopes, through storms, and over treacherous terrain, and she had survived. More importantly, she had witnessed the incredible capacity of human ingenuity and endurance. Kale carefully lowered her to the ground near the settlement. She stood unsteadily at first, but the warmth of the colony and the support of the colonists helped her regain balance. She looked at him, her eyes wide with admiration and gratitude. "You carried me through 4 days of impossible terrain," she said softly. I don't know how to thank you." Kale shook his head lightly. "No need for thanks," he said. "Today, you saw what humans are capable of. Strength isn't just in the body, it's in the mind, in patience, in endurance, and in caring for each other. That's how humans survive. That's how we carry each other through challenges." Lyra smiled, feeling a deep sense of understanding. She had begged him to leave, doubting both her own strength and his. But Kale had proven that human determination, ingenuity, and compassion could overcome even the harshest conditions. She realized now that survival wasn't about brute strength or luck. It was about intelligence, preparation, and the willingness to support others. The colonists surrounded them, offering warm blankets, food, and encouraging words. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from relief and pride. She had survived because of Kale, yes, but also because humans were capable of more than she had ever imagined. That evening, as the sun set over the plateau, Kale and Lyra stood together, looking out over the frozen landscape they had conquered. The canyon, the hills, the icy streams, all had been challenges they faced and overcame. Lyra felt a deep sense of respect for the human spirit. Humans endured, humans adapted, and humans carried each other through the impossible. Kale turned to her, smiling faintly. Today we've proven something important. Humans can face incredible challenges and survive, not just because of machines, but because of determination, intelligence, and care for one another. That's what makes us remarkable. Lyra nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the sun or the blankets. I understand now, she said softly. Humans aren't just strong. We're clever, resilient, and capable of amazing things when we work together. I will never forget this. Kale looked out over the plateau once more, the settlement below them glowing softly in the evening light. Neither will I, he said. And remember, the journey isn't just about surviving. It's about learning, adapting, and helping each other. That's how we endure, and that's how humans shine. They stayed there for a while, taking in the quiet beauty of the frozen landscape. The journey had been exhausting, but it had also been a testament to human capability. Lyra realized that she had witnessed not just survival, but the essence of humanity: intelligence, ingenuity, endurance, and compassion working together. As night fell, the colony lights glimmered, and Lyra and Kale returned to the warmth of the settlement. Exhausted but triumphant, they finally allowed themselves to rest fully. They had carried each other through storms, ice, and fatigue, and they had survived. More than that, they had proven what humans could do when mind, heart, and determination combined. In the quiet of the settlement, Lyra reflected on the journey. She had begged him to leave, but he had refused. He had carried her through 4 days of unimaginable hardship, demonstrating patience, intelligence, and endurance. She realized now that humans were capable of more than she had ever imagined, and that together they could overcome any challenge. Kale sat beside her, quietly checking the exoskeleton for maintenance. Lyra watched him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and admiration. The journey had taught her a lesson she would never forget. Humans endure, adapt, and carry each other through impossible circumstances. And with that determination, there was no challenge too great, no obstacle too insurmountable. As she drifted to sleep that night, Lyra felt a deep sense of peace. The frozen wilderness had tea-asted them, but humans had prevailed. Kale's careful planning, intelligence, and determination had carried them through, but more than that, it was the human spirit itself, the drive to endure, adapt, and care, that had made survival possible. When she awoke the next morning, the settlement was alive with activity. Colonists moved about, preparing for their day, and the sun reflected off the icy plateau. Kale had already begun inspecting paths for further travel, ensuring that all routes were safe. Lyra rose slowly, feeling stronger and more confident than she had in days. The frozen landscape beyond was still formidable, but they were ready. Together, they had endured storms, ice, and fatigue. Together, they had crossed canyons, slopes, and ridges. And together, they would continue to prove that humans, through intelligence, ingenuity, endurance, and care, could overcome any challenge. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. Kale stood beside her, the exoskeleton humming quietly, ready for the next step. She realized that survival wasn't just about strength or tools. It was about the mind, the heart, and the willingness to carry each other through impossible circumstances. And as they set off across the plateau, the sun casting its golden light over the frozen landscape, Lyra felt a new sense of hope and confidence. Humans could endure. Humans could adapt. Humans could carry each other through the impossible. Today had proven it. Tomorrow they would continue to prove it, step by careful step together.